Yes, I know we are extremely fake and we are extremely late and extremely gay today, but it happens. So, welcome back to another episode of Pony Express Radio. Who's that typing? I will isolate. You know. Well, we're back for another episode of Pony Express Radio. Mr. Pete is taking the week off because he just so loves to talk about geopolitics. So Pete's like, I'm out. And we're like, okay, cool. We'll bring in our good friend, Mr. Semiogogue, and perhaps our dear friend Marcus will be joining us. But how are you, Semiogogue? Always a pleasure to speak with you.
I'm doing very well. I had a boomer moment there. I thought I muted the mic and I muted my audio, and I was like, why can't I hear Red Hawk? So this, bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. This promises to be exciting. And yeah, thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, always good to have you. Yeah, the OBS thing, it's like you can mute like all the sound, and then there's a mute mic button as well, and sometimes you can get them confused. So yeah, it's very easy to get it screwed up. But anyway,
yeah, especially if you're me, yes.
All right, let's get through the list of sponsors and friends before we get into the news of the week. So, as people know, White Boy Summer is drawing to a close, but that doesn't mean you can't get in tip-top shape for White Boy Winter. As everybody knows, the white man gets his strength from the cold. Southerners are just wrong in this regard. You know, true people of the North will know the white man's strength comes from the cold. And you too can be geared up for White Boy Winter by heading on over to Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching. Link is in the description where you guys will get in top shape for the winter season. While you guys are at it, for those of you who need your caffeine fix, look no further than Fox & Sons Coffee. Dear friend of the show and the broader movement in general, please do give your patronage to Fox & Sons. All of you coffee drinkers out there that we know are giving it nothing but fantastic reviews, so please stock up on Fox & Sons. While you guys are at it, we here at OGC are fans of big tobacco, and there's no better way to take advantage of that than Alp nicotine pouches. Link in the description. Alp gets me through tax season and can get you your work day as well. So head on over to Alp nicotine pouches. While you guys are at it, you need to be looking like top men in not just top physical shape, but also in the way you dress. Still, to this day, I believe the number one trafficked article on the OGC Substack is The Metaphysics of Dress by our dear Mr. Not Me, Not You. And the best way to get yourself in, looking like a sharp dressed man, to quote a ZZ Top, is to head on over to MS Vendrillo. I do believe the summer sale might still be going on where select items are up to 50% off. So definitely check that out. You can immediately tell who is wearing a Vendrillo suit at any of our OGC events. They just stand out immediately. They look so freaking good, man. Awesome. And I was really excited when I got fitted for one this year. So definitely head on over to that. And then finally, you guys should head on over to Tall Men Books, run by our good friend, Mr. George Bagby. You can catch him on Mondays on American Spirits. The man is just an absolute wealth of knowledge, and he's been working tirelessly to bring back various books on American history from the 17th, 18th, 19th century back into print. You could find them nowhere else except Tall Man Books. So be sure to check that out. And speaking of books, why don't we just give a quick shout out to our good friend, Mr. Thomas Sear, Thomas 777, whose book is out right now. You guys can go get it on Amazon. Thomas Sear, that's CYR. Go check that out. The Nuremberg Regime. Be sure to take a look at that. All right. Mr. Semiogogue, we're here to talk about the various goings-on the geopolitical stage right now, because, the first place for us to start is, we've been talking about this on the show for many, many months at this point. Me not being a military man, even I knew this was going to be a major problem when we decided to start a war for the Israelis and the Strait of Hormuz. That, the strategic petroleum reserves of the United States were definitely going to be affected. And we were watching this closely for months. But now even mainstream sources are now finally acknowledging that, that strategic petroleum reserve, it's at the lowest it's ever been since we first started it back in the 1970s, and we only have about 2 weeks left. And it doesn't look like the Iranians are in any position to start negotiations once again after this failed memorandum of understanding that was about a month ago now. So I don't know. I guess my advice to everybody is gear up on your gas cans. Hopefully you don't have the EPA regulated piece of shit ones. But head to your local gas station, man, and stock up, because I think it's about to look pretty bad with gas and oil prices pretty soon. What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, it's a mess. If you're going to get gas, try to do what you can to find the ethanol-free gas. The ethanol additive in the gas causes all sorts of problems with the stability of the gasoline over time, or can. And gas isn't particularly stable as it stands. But yeah, if you're going to top off on it, or have a few cans. I've got like 2 5-gallon cans. I went and got the ethanol-free gas, and that's just for emergencies, because man, you'd have to suck a lot of it away. The bigger problem probably surrounds the cost of diesel. As I was reading today, according to people who know more about it than I think it was something Stormy shared, actually. The real issue is the diesel price, and the diesel price is up over $100 a barrel now. The observation that was made is that, you can talk about, and its cost or whatever, but the issue is the capacity to refine it, and in particular to refine it into diesel, which is necessary to keep this whole show running. And there are real problems with that, with the attacks, of course, by the Ukrainians all across Russia. They're different, energy storage facilities, as well as their refineries, the blocking of a lot of transit of all sorts of things, including energy from the Black Sea. Of course, the problems with the Strait of Hormuz, which everyone will, of course, know about, as well as the Bab el-Mandeb on the Red Sea, where the Houthis have on occasion and are currently threatening again to make it difficult for anyone to roll through that area. I think a lot of traffic is being routed around it in any case. So it all paints a picture of things getting, a whole lot worse before they get better. And I mean, just the prices that I pay going to the grocery store. And, I'm not going to Whole Foods, I'm going to Sam's Club and buying in bulk and sticking it in a chest freezer and picking up odds and ends from Walmart. And, I can't get out of a trip, and I'm buying for a household of 2 with a baby, but the baby's basically still nursing, just a little bit of food here and there. So I'm not, I'm really just feeding 2 people, and I eat 1 meal a day, and I'm easily at like $300 for a grocery visit.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, first of all, the first thing I'll say in response to that is that sounds very entitled of you, sir. What, you think that grocery prices aren't supposed to go up? Don't you know we're fighting a war to stop the new axis of evil, the Iranians, who are getting a nuclear weapon? And of course, we can all do our part to pay a little bit more in gas, just like those brave boomers in World War II. So that's
the number one state sponsor of terror.
We've been fighting them for 40 years, don't you know?
Yeah, and you have a really hard time pointing out any kind of Iranian sponsored terror attacks. They just fall back on IEDs, in places like Syria or Iraq. And I'm sure that's the case, but
Yeah. The other thing about that too is, like, I'm sure that these people would accept that argument for I don't know, like suing gun manufacturers after a non decides to shoot a guy in the middle of the street or something, like, oh, it's the gun manufacturer's fault. It's like, well, don't you see, Iran created these IEDs, and then the Syrians planted them there, so therefore the Iranians are responsible for all this. I'm like, okay, man. I mean, that doesn't mean I have to like Iranians or start supporting them here, but all right, this is a bit of a stretch here. All right.
Yeah. That's being charitable about it. At this point, it just, even, Teflon Don's ability to, the famous statements, I could go murder someone in the street and everyone would still love me. At this point, that's becoming very, very difficult to credit. And I don't know how much longer everyone can just lie their asses off. But if my lived experience of politics, watching it from the outside is any indicator, they're going to lie forever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's been no shortage of that since the kickoff of this war, ranging from why we're here in the first place. Yes, we destroyed the nuclear sites last year in the greatest operation in the history of operations, but we have to go back in there now. And apparently, this time the sanctions are going to work and bring Iran to the table, even though we've been putting sanctions on them for 40 plus years or something like that. So, who the hell knows what's going on that front? And then how many times have we gone through this where the 45 times back and forth of the Strait of Hormuz is closed, it's open, we have total control, nobody's blockading, and it's like, what? What are we
Well,
doing
I mean,
here?
not to mention, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure all the listeners know, but it's worth pointing out that the fucking strait was, excuse me, the strait was open in the first place. So to approach this whole thing as if the key to settling these affairs and going home victorious is to have the strait open, then, you know, why go there in the first place?
Yeah, yes, indeed. And our good friend Furius Pertinax has joined us. How are you, sir?
I come from the land down under.
Yeah.
Marcus Furious.
Can't you hear that thunder? I don't know, maybe
We cannot hear your thunder, Marcus.
I don't know, maybe his microphone was having similar issues that yours was or something. I don't know. Well, he'll keep fiddling around with it, and yeah, we'll get it to work. So anyway, but yeah, so carrying on. So yes, so even the New York Times has finally reported that yes, the strategic petroleum reserves of the United States are down to the lowest level since the 70s, and we only have about 2 weeks left. So, and I mean, it's just so irresponsible for me to, well, really for our leaders in charge, basically, to be starting this conversation about once again, like, oh, you guys are just spoiled and entitled for thinking prices are going to go up. And it's like, well, everyone can suck up paying an extra dollar for gasoline. And it's like, well, that's not the argument that's being had here, right? Because as we pointed out, that the entire economy runs on gasoline. The cost of everything is going to go up. It's not just you're paying more at the pump. People are like, oh, well, I work from home, so who really cares? It's like, well, I mean, the people who drive your groceries to the grocery store don't work from home. All the other odds and ends items that you buy on a daily basis from Amazon, those people aren't working from home either, right? So the cost of everything increases when the cost of gasoline increases. So this is just a price hike across the board for a war that the American people, the vast majority of whom, did not want in the first place. So you can switch around these poll numbers however you want, right? To say like, oh well, the majority of Americans don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and it's like, well, then you ask them, it's like, well, would you spend $100 per grocery trip more than you normally would to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon? It drops down to like 5% of people who want to do
Well,
this.
there's also the the difficult little detail, which is that, and many people have observed this, and I think it's quite fair to say, they didn't have one when we started all of this, and everything that we have done drives them to recognize that unless you do have a nuclear weapon, you're not safe from this. I mean, meanwhile, North Korea has one, and we're just like, oh, it's cool, man. I love Kim Jong Un. We get along well. Let's have peace in the Koreas because I get along well, and I can get Rocket Man on the phone whenever I want. And never mind the fact that he has nuclear weapons and a ballistic missile program. It's just there's a certain point where it's like, I was born at night, but not last night.
Yeah, we're going to get to a deeper discussion about the Korean Peninsula shortly, because this is a story that kind of fell under the radar as it relates to the rest of the stuff that's been going on in geopolitics land. But we'll get there when we get there. But I mean, yeah, it's just obvious at this point that what this Iran war has really shown more than anything is that if you are basically any one of these powers who's kind of like on the outs with any of the NATO countries or anything like that, outside of the quote unquote world order, right? You should be speeding towards a nuclear weapon as fast as possible. It's like if you're playing a game of Civilization, you need to be putting all of your various population and various buildings, and you need to be focusing them all towards tech as fast as possible so you could study nuclear fission, because apparently that's the only way that countries like the United States and others will just not fuck with you and actually bring you to the table. So, I mean, if I was the Iranians, as soon as this is over, if not, if they're not already, they're doing it right now. It's like, yes, you should absolutely be speeding towards development of a nuclear missile like yesterday. It's just the only way these incentives are going at this point. It's like you just have to do this because apparently it's the only way these countries won't, just drop bombs on you whenever they feel like.
Well, the purpose of a system is what it does, and we can, most of us, I'm sure, can remember that Gaddafi was convinced to give up his nuclear program and did so, thinking that it would allow him to, get better integration with European markets and, the lifting of sanctions with the West and, all that sort of stuff. And he ended up getting bayoneted in the ass, if I remember correctly, and that was celebrated by Clinton, who clapped along saying, we saw, he died. So there's a point where you have to say I was born at night, but not last night. I mean, it stacks up all the nonsense and the lies. At a certain point, the whole structure is going to collapse from this nonsense.
Yeah, it's just so ridiculous that the regime approved reason for why we are involved in this conflict at all is to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons, when in fact what this conflict has done is only ensured the continued proliferation of nuclear weapons throughout the entire world. Because as we've just discussed, it's the only way to prevent people from screwing with you. So good job on that, everybody.
Yeah, again, the purpose of the system is what it does, and right now we're seeing a massive economic storm on the horizon, and part of it's here now. I want to be careful not to do what everyone does, which is to always invoke, the future tense. Like, if we don't do this or that, this will eventually happen. No, it's happening now. Mm-hmm. It's present tense. But the thing is that there's a whole lot of depth. There are a number of benches running back towards the horizon where, deep benches for chaos and problems. And I have to wonder, being about as trusting as the average tarantula, as my friend used to say, whether or not this is intended. I can see a number of ways that, the story about alternative sources of energy could be pushed as a result of this if there is a big, change in administration in the United States. And even if not, in the meantime, how are the Seven Sisters or the petroleum companies, how are they doing right now? I mean, the prices are going up. So even if they're facing difficulty in some respects, like bombing port facilities for energy that Chevron has investments in on the Black Sea, even if we acknowledge that kind of thing, they're still making money hand over fist.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the wheel turns slowly, but it still turns, right? Well, I guess we'll see what ends up happening on this front. I mean, as it relates to the discussions on like alternative sources of energy, I do find it interesting that over the last couple of years, we've kind of shifted away across the entire globe, really. This Green New Deal nonsense about how we have to move away to alternative forms of energy or what have you. And mostly that's been because they realize that it's literally going to be impossible for them to put in all these various data centers all over the place. That is basically the only part of the economy that's even remotely seeing any growth at this point, even though I personally think this is just a massive bubble, bigger than anything. Yeah, bigger than anything we've ever seen before, bigger than the .com bubble by a magnitude, especially at this point. But seeing as that is basically the only part of the economy that's showing any growth whatsoever, like, oh, we just got to pump into this thing. And the only way we're going to pump, up these data centers that are just going to require ungodly amounts of energy. For what result? Well, that remains to be seen. Basically, for what I could tell, my personal opinion is a glorified search engine with some, thumbnail generation capabilities. But we'll see what ends up happening on that front. But yeah, I mean, they're gonna have to get their energy from somewhere, right?
Yeah, and the data center thing. I mean, yeah, it's rather pedestrian. All the AI stuff that we have access to, but I have to imagine that the Palantirs of the world, or, Elon Musk, if he looks at his own is sort of, interface with Grok tools or whatever, I think they see a very different world. I think the consumer and prosumer versions are very, very different from, the professional world of the military and the intelligence agencies. So I just don't see anything good coming from the so-called AI revolution. As you say, for the average user, it's just sort of a promise of Ask Jeeves finally realized. But for our masters, I imagine that there's quite a bit more going on there in terms of the capabilities they now have.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I mean, yeah, just my gut reaction to this is the same as it's ever been. Butlerian jihad now. Basically, I just none of this is going to be good for any of us. At the end of the day, it's just going to dumb people's brain capacities down, and increase various surveillance mechanisms for the rest of us here at home. So, no, I just think that all of this is bad. I'm just firmly against this technocratic revolution that we're going to grow our way out of this. Now, as of yesterday, now $40 trillion in debt, the United States. I remember back during the Obama and McCain years when it just crossed 10 trillion in debt. And that was like the huge thing. It's like George W. Bush's spending is out of control. And here we are, $40 trillion in debt. What is that? Like almost 20 years later? So.
And buying our own bonds in order to, tamp down the problems that are beginning to, blow out the sides of all of this. It's, I have no idea what's going to happen, man, but I am not sanguine about our prospects.
No, I mean, this is why I've enjoyed the discussion that many people are having about the idea of a debt jubilee. Once again, I know Sargon has been talking about this quite a bit recently, and then you can look to historical analogs such as Solon of Athens and whatnot. That you just need to have one of these every couple hundred years or so, because if you don't, there's just going to be no shakeup in these markets literally ever. I really don't see how anything can continue at this point. There's no hopes and no way that the United States is going to pay off this $40 trillion. Like, it's just impossible. It cannot be done. Well, so the only way it's going to work is a complete reset.
Yeah, and the last time we did that, I'm no nerd, knowledgeable nerd as regards monetary policy and all the rest. But in my understanding is we dumped our debt last time by dumping the gold standard and basically plugging in the petrodollar, and now we're doing everything in our power to destroy any kind of stability for the petrodollar. Which means, I don't know, something with central bank digital currencies or something, whatever it is.
The Trump coin dollar.
It's going to be
coming
bad.
Soon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, gear up, everybody, for this. Hard economic times are definitely ahead, I would say. And hashtag not financial advice, but I think that S&P 500 minus tech, could be an interesting place just to wait out the storm, because as far as I see it, that AI bubble is going to burst, and when it bursts, it's going to be hard. But anyway, we were kind of making nods to this a little bit earlier in this discussion, but actually let us turn to what is currently happening on the Korean Peninsula. So, in addition to our discussion about the strategic oil reserves of the United States reaching historic lows here, we're also running out of various missile defenses, like our THAAD missile defenses and whatnot, because if the Iranians just keep on shooting missiles at our defenses and Israel defenses, and the Israelis refuse to use their missiles to protect American defenses, even though we literally got dragged into this war for them, really nice allies there, not using their defenses to protect any of our stuff. And in addition to the fact that we've already been offloading a bunch of these to the Ukrainians over the last couple of years for them to fight their fruitless war against the Russians. So we're running out of all of our air defenses. And what's the solution to this? Oh, well, I guess we'll just take them out of the Koreas. So here's a post from Donald Trump's Truth Social account. Based on my very good relationship with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, I am not happy with the fact the United States has long ago agreed to participate in joint military exercises with South Korea. These exercises are not only costly, with much of these costs paid for by the United States of America, as usual, but send a signal that is totally inappropriate and hostile to a country that, as long as Donald J. Trump has been president, has been unthreatening and respectful. Therefore, and based on the fact that it is too late to cancel, I have instructed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to substantially reduce joint military exercises. While somewhat unrelated, I recently asked the president of South Korea if they would like to join us in the denuclearization of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they said, no thanks. Thank you for attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So, man, oh man. I mean, they could sugarcoat this any way they like here, right? Like, oh, my great relationship with Kim Jong-un or what have you, and this is why we're doing this. But it's like, okay, we all know why this is happening. Okay, we have stockpiled a bunch of munitions on the DMZ line in the Korean Peninsula for decades at this point, and we need them in other places. So we're going to pull out, and that's basically all there is to it. And yeah, so initial thoughts on this, Oliver.
Well, turning back towards the topic we were just discussing, with Iran, I think there's a very interesting little piece here that he let slip, because he said the denuclearization. First off, that's something very different from saying no nuclear weapons. And we know that at the time all of this was launched back on whatever it was, February 28th, for the latest round of it, they didn't have nuclear weapons. That's what everyone was reporting. So it's interesting that he says denuclearization here, because I did a post about this some time back. My belief is there are major concerns. Basically, what's the very short way to say this? If you remember the Iran-Iraq war, the United States, got driven out of Iran. The embassy got taken over, and we got a bloody nose and looked bad. And the Iranian Revolution continued and everything. And shortly after all of that happened with the embassy, the United States basically pumped a bunch of money and support into Iraq to get them to attack Iran. And that was relatively easy for them to do, at least the initial movements of it, because the oil producing regions of Iran, the major ones, border Iraq. And they are sort of inside Iran, but they are outside the sort of mountainous fortress walls of Iran. And so the Iranians understand that the hardest area for them to defend is the area right there around the Gulf and the border with Iraq, which is where their major energy reserves are located. And so if someone really did start a ground invasion against them, you would quickly discover, the Iranians would quickly be in a situation where even if they could hold out very well in terms of the mountainous nature of the terrain and its defensibility, the one area that would be relatively easy for a ground invasion to get would be right there on the border with Iraq, just north of the Gulf, as you can see in the image here. So in any kind of long or protracted situation with ground troops coming in, Iran would be facing real energy problems. However, if they can get an indigenous nuclear program going, and they've done so, that is to say nuclear power, nuclear energy, not nuclear weapons, then they would be in a much more defensible position. And of course, the Russians have helped them. I think it's Bushahir or whatever. And they have some of their own test reactors and the rest. So what I'm getting at here is that in that tweet, when Donald Trump says, would you like to get on board with the denuclearization of Iran, which is very different from saying, making sure that they don't have nuclear weapons, then, you start to see the same program that started after 1979 or whenever, when Iraq got stood up and, the little key wound in its back and it went marching off towards Iran to attack it. the Iranians can defend themselves in terms of, withstanding a protracted siege and providing energy to their population if they have nuclear facilities producing power. So I think there's something of that going on that Trump let slip there with his post. In terms of the Korean Peninsula, a lot of the talking heads online, they've observed, and I think they're right. People like Douglas McGregor, they say, the Koreans just want us out of there. And I think that's true. So, I think that's going to be one of those situations where the United States is leaving and the South Koreans are like, well, we want to stay under your umbrella of protection, but we'd be very happy to see your bases gone because they're a source of destabilization in the region. In terms of North Korea itself, they seem to be getting along better and better and better with the Russians. And as we, observed earlier,
North Koreans are fighting in Ukraine now.
Yeah, apparently they've got, depending on who you talk to, it's somewhere between 20 and 40,000 troops. Some people say, well, it's not all troops. A lot of them are people doing things behind the line in terms of building fortifications or other kinds of support activities that free up units that Russian units that can then be moved to the front line. But there is talk, you've probably heard of it, of some sort of North Korean units being sent that have their own missiles, something like, I don't know, 100, 120, something like that. And it's speculated that they've joined with the Russians for part of this in order to build up their own indigenous capacity and experience with modern warfare. I'm sure everyone is taking notes on things like long-range drones and electronic warfare and the rest.
Yeah, I mean, people can disagree and try and fight this however they want online, but this line that the Russian military is a paper tiger and they're pathetic and they're weak. Look, they haven't even been able to do anything against Ukraine in all these years. And it's like, I mean, I'm no expert on this stuff, but at least from where I'm sitting, the Russians are the first major power on the planet that has had prolonged exposure to drone warfare at this point. And at least I'm not like following this a crazy amount like some other people in our scene are, but at least from what I'm seeing, they're developing all these countermeasures for drones and they're going back and forth with each other, trying to figure out new kinds of technologies to make these drones perform better and how to counteract them and whatnot. I mean, I think this is going to pay some major dividends down the road for the Russians, having this kind of experience with what is absolutely the future of warfare.
Yeah, they're the only truly blooded global superpower military. And yeah, the Ukrainians are of course very experienced with drones as well. And you have to imagine that a considerable proportion of the lessons they learn, at least the theory of it and the ideas of it, it's getting passed back to the Western countries that support them. But, there's not going to be any substitute for having large numbers of people who've had, shit rain straight up in their experience on the battlefield, who are both, dealing with using drones offensively and defensively. And the Ukrainians have that to some extent. The Russians have it at least to the extent that the Ukrainians do, but I expect they're institutionalizing it more thoroughly simply because they've got more resources. Also, they've got China supporting them. So I expect that there's quite a bit of communication between the Russian and Chinese militaries, not in terms necessarily of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, but in terms of taking the lessons learned there and planning for the future.
Indeed. Marcus, are you with us, sir?
Okay, does this work now?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
How are you, sir?
Wonderful, gentlemen. It's lovely to be back on Old Glory Club. I don't think I've been on for like the best part of 2 years. So thank you. Roadhawk, my friend. Lovely to be with you. And my very, very good friend, Semiogogue. It's been far too long, but glad to be back, gentlemen. Lovely to be with you guys.
Yeah, excellent, man. Speaking to you about stuff related to Australia, and of course being on streams with you with the mighty Apostolic Majesty. But as you say, it has been too long. Very good to be talking with you again, sir.
It has been. Yes, lovely to share the panel with some fellow settler types. So, yes, no, gentlemen, I'm sorry, I have been listening. Obviously, I've had some microphone issues, but yes, OBS and Linux makes for a hell of a combination. But anyway, we're sorted. I suppose get straight into the topic. Just to follow on what Semiogogue was saying is that, and I think for those who've listened to any of my commentary about this, although I haven't spoken about this topic for a very long time. I think periodically, I think Charlie jumps on like once a year and does a stream about Russia, Ukraine. Now, our periodic like monthly streams have gone the way of the dodo, but I think you've canvassed most of those points. What I will say is that I think and you mentioned Douglas McGregor, Semiogogue, and I think there's been other sort of commentators in that field. People like Larry Johnson, for example, and who's the other one? Daniel Davis. And it's interesting, especially those in the case of Daniel Davis being a sort of former infantryman and listening to their approach about all this. And obviously how it's so contrary to the mainstream coverage that we've received about the Russia-Ukraine war, and how I think a lot of the assumptions that the mainstream media tried to push on about this just were plainly untrue. I think probably with the exception of the Battle of Bakhmut, we're not seeing, for instance, mass infantry assaults by the Russians. If you look at the strategic map of how Russia has gradually, sort of incrementally, in an almost glacial sense, established control over the Donbass and has, quite methodically taken over territory, the Russians have been methodical. And you both mentioned the important aspect about drones is that Russia will be the first sort of mainline, foremost international military power to have real world battlefield experience, both utilizing drones and defending against them, because this is still an emerging technology. I know this is going to be a bit of a crude comparison, right? But because a little while ago I actually reread Guderian's book Achtung Panzer, and it's interesting how really the Allies had the means to adopt tanks in a very serious way from 1917 onwards. And despite the fact that the Germans had in fact conceived of countermeasures, given the state of exhaustion of the Reichswehr by sort of 1918, and even though the Germans did pour everything westwards with the St. Michael offensive, what they call the Kaiserschlacht in 1918, the Americans, the British, and the French in combination were able to produce and field a large number of tanks, far in excess of what the Germans had. I think the Germans managed to make a few dozen tanks, and the Allies had hundreds and hundreds of them. Yet, when you get to 1939, it's very different. It's a case of almost the Germans being on the receiving end of them, understood the technology better. And there's that old sort of, it's a bit of an anachronism, but the adage of when they crossed into France in 1940 that, the French had, 4,000 tanks in 4,000 locations, and the Germans had, 4,000 tanks in one location, And I know like history dweebs don't like to use the word blitzkrieg, but that's basically what blitzkrieg is. It's a mass application of force in one place. And you look from 1940 through to 1945, and you see a very, very rapid evolution of both armored technology and the tactical use of armor in warfare. And I think we're seeing this with drones now. And I think there have been a lot of, shall I say, exceedingly quick, maybe presumptuous conclusions about drones. And the fact that both the Germans and the Russians and the Ukrainians have had to like fumble their way towards understanding how this works, because no one's really used drones in the same way up until this war. And so what you're sort of seeing now is a mastery of drone warfare, or at least in the early phase of its military usage. And and obviously Oliver also mentioned like the idea of countermeasures, that the Russians extensively have used jamming. And the Russians are also the ones, I don't think, unless I'm mistaken, I don't know if the Ukrainians use them or not, but I know the Russians use the like the fly-by-wire,
the fiber optics.
Yeah, exactly. The fiber optic ones, which very much increase.
Yeah, the Ukrainians do have some, but they were in, a day late and a dime short, and they're not
Hmm.
as far along with it, and they don't have
Yeah, yeah,
as many of them as the Russians. Yeah.
correct. Yeah. So, what you're seeing is sort of like almost two different philosophies playing out. And of course, the Russians being in charge of their own production lines can determine what they do and don't want, or what they do and don't have. The Ukrainians are very much, they do have a domestic production line of them, but they're also, as we all know, very dependent on international assistance and basically whatever they can receive via NATO and, from you guys, etc. And so that sort of inhibits Ukraine's ability to sort of determine what weapon systems it does and doesn't use. But again, we will continue witnessing a maturation of both the means of delivery, which is the drones, and the countermeasures as the war goes on. But needless to say, just to sort of buttress the point, or to bookend the point, that every theory that has been put forward about Russian attrition, and for those who have, say, watched the streams that myself and our friends have done with Charlemagne, for instance, and we have emphasized, particularly say like when Charlie and I used to go on AA show, for instance, and we used to stress that the Russians will engage in some kind of attritional warfare. Once they did that big withdrawal when they were negotiating in Istanbul back in March or April 22, they did switch their posture, and what you're now seeing is the sort of ripening of that change in operational doctrine, as it were.
What do you guys make of the? I have no idea the truth of these claims, but allegedly the Russians are starting to strike munitions factories actually in Europe proper. Has this actually been confirmed, or it seems like a
I
major escalation because the Ukrainians
Yeah.
have been striking deep into Russian territory as of late. I mean, was it just a freak accident that some of these munition factories just happened to
I've
explode? I think that's
I've
you know
I, I think there's quite a bit of sabotage, but Marcus may know better than I. But I'm not aware of any strikes from Russia on production facilities in Europe. There's just plausible deniability, sabotage. Um, and I'm not saying that any of that has been set in stone as reliable, but it seems likely. If I were Russians, I'd be sabotaging things quietly, but I don't think there are any strikes. Have you heard anything about that, Marcus?
I haven't. No, I was about to say I'm waiting for like Charlotte to send me like a Perun video to to analyze possibly at some point.
Fucking
But
Perun, man. Oh my God,
uh,
man.
no, I,
That
I
guy.
can't say I have any information to confirm or deny. What we all know, obviously, because we've heard these statements, that particularly I think Lavrov has been saying this, that eventually at some point the Russians will actually conclude them as being viable targets. But once this actually happens, it's going to cross a significant red line in terms of the escalation of this conflict, whether or not it's going to be the benefit to the Russians to do this. I don't know. It's going to be, put this way, it's going to be a very, very serious line that I think the Russians will have to reckon with at some point. And whether they do it or not, I don't know. But I would hope, for the sake of how can I put this? For the sake of general well-being in Europe, I would hope that it doesn't happen. But again, we've gone to the point where if we all cast our minds back years ago, they didn't send the jets to Ukraine because that was going to be a escalation line, and eventually that was crossed, and then eventually they sent all kinds of assistance except armor in terms of MBT's mainline battle tanks. Eventually they got sent, and so this is going to be probably a major red line that if and when crossed, it's going to take us right up to the point of, well, then you're talking about the next conceivable obstacle is Russian forces in countries when and at such time that the Ukrainian army falls. Now, I've personally never been of the belief that Putin actually has such ambitions myself, nor other people in the Russian state. Oh, and when I say the Russian state, I'm not talking about like individual academics. They might have their opinions, but I can't imagine anyone in like the Russian government, for instance, maybe with the exception of Medvedev, might harbor these opinions. But yeah, I have to say that I don't know Red Hawk to enough information to be able to confirm or deny like categorically.
Yeah, I mean, from where I'm standing, at least it seems directionally correct to me. Enough. Like my intuition is like, well, the KGB were no slouches, right? And I can't imagine that they've stopped being effective. Because at least
Right.
unlike our intelligence services over here, they haven't been staffed with a bunch of DEI nonsense. So, and at least with their moves that they're making on the sub-Saharan Africa and whatnot, I think it's totally within the realms of reason to have Russian sabotage be responsible for some of these munitions factories, whether it's in I think one of them was in Belarus and the other one was in Italy. That recently went up in flames. Even though it's not a strike from a missile, I think it's definitely within the realms of possibility that some trickery was involved. Yeah.
Meds being meds, though, someone might have just knocked over the coffee pot and ignited the factory. Who knows? I mean,
well, if it's Belarus, they're. If you said Belarus, that's of course a close Russian ally. So there certainly could have been, they're producing.
That's a good point, Oliver, because Lukashenko is quite a close, ally of Putin in many ways. And you got to think when they first invaded in 22, I mean, Russian forces pushed into Ukraine and towards Kiev via Gomel, which is in Belarus. So I'd be surprised if there's NATO production facilities in Belarus. But interesting thought.
No, well, anyway, so I guess we'll see what's going on with this one. But winter is coming once again, and the discussion we were having earlier on the various potential energy crisis that might be on the horizon here if this strait doesn't get open, which as far as like where I'm sitting, it doesn't seem like there's any reason for it to open anytime soon. It doesn't seem like Donald Trump has the it seems like he doesn't have the will at all to actually bring about another peace deal. And if I were the Iranians sitting in their position right now, they know they have the leverage. And if there is going to be a deal struck, it's definitely going to be way more favorable than the original MOU was to the Iranians. So what are they going to do here politically wise? All the incentives over here in the States are for the can to get further kicked down the road and thrown in the lap of somebody else. And I mean, I know a lot of people were calling people like Tucker Carlson a complete kook and a loon for talking about this. But, if they don't get this straight open and the political cost here at home with soaring gas prices and soaring prices of everything else, especially as we get into winter, I could definitely see that the Trump administration just might be, willing to drop a nuclear weapon on Iran. I at the beginning of this conflict was like, no, there's no way you're going to do that. But now more and more, I'm like, well, we can't seem to bring the Iranians to the negotiating table with sanctions. We can't bring them to the negotiating table with a couple bombing raids. We're running out of munitions. We're absolutely not going to send in ground troops because that would be even bigger political fallout than even using a nuclear weapon, maybe. So it's like the options are rapidly the doors to various solutions are rapidly being closed.
Just on that point, because it just entered my mind. Could you imagine? And I mean, I hope it doesn't happen because I'm a person who I have I mean, I like anyone, like any rational person, certainly no love for the Iranian regime. Quite personally, I would have preferred the Shah as an example if I had the choice. But and I'm an appreciator of Iranian culture and history. So I certainly would not want this to happen. But just picture, for instance, if the current administration was desperate enough to go that way. Imagine the morning after, or even that night, the night of it happening. Could you imagine how delighted Mark Levin would be? Like, honestly.
Oh my God, he was just gooing all over the screen. On Fox
I was going to say that they need to like weigh down the desk because his heart would be so massive. Like he'd be so delighted at the outcome of finally this regime has been nuked and he can delight in it for weeks on end. Because that's what the lobbies wanted all this time is not only that they'll say the dismantling of the Islamic Republic regime, but also that they do have an animus with their neighbors, of which the Iranian is one adversary amongst many, correct?
So, I mean, it just...
I don't see him nuking anything, but you know what? I've been spectacularly wrong before.
I'm inclined to agree with you, by the way.
Just because everybody, I mean, all the little, sort of leftists pretending to be centrists, with the possible exception of Douglas McGregor, who I think is more like center right. But everyone from Alexander Mercouris to Larry Johnson and the Nima Al Khorshid, his or Khorshid, I can't remember his damn name. That whole group, and there are a lot of them.
The Jeffrey Sachs types and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. All of them point out, and they're quite right, the conventional capabilities of the Iranians, if they were not just doing tit for tat and they really wanted to let it rip, they could. I wouldn't say all of Israel would be craters, but probably most of it would be. And the same goes for Gulf states. And yeah. So, and you see that currently, Israel is saying, well, we don't want to get involved in all this. You guys can, continue fighting. It's now the U.S. dealing with Iran and the
Thanks, guys. Really, really great allies there. Yeah. Starts a bar fight and then sneaks out the back.
Well, let's just remember. I know you guys know this, but for people who don't know this, Israel has never, ever signed any reciprocal treaty of alliance with the United States. Not one. No. Israel is not an ally. They have never signed a treaty. They have no mutual defense or reciprocal defense obligations. They've never been an ally. They're not an ally. So yeah, put that in there in the basket with world's greatest, most evil state sponsor of terrorism about Iran. Both are just bullshit.
May we remind the audience who in fact is your most enduring ally, who's fought alongside you in every conflict that America's been in?
The French.
I like that answer.
Yeah.
Yes. No. Remember, we've got to think we didn't even abandon you in Vietnam, so we've been there with you the whole way.
Well, the Aussies were in the Australians were in Vietnam before we were, weren't they?
Well, we were in Malay with the British. We actually got there very quickly because we're already in Malay. Yeah, but just as I just want to touch on that point about Iran is that, and just to put this to in the same way that one would place a proclamation to print, I'm sort of putting this to the internet, is that when I actually look at this and I sort of ponder on this Iran conflict, because this has obviously sort of happened in the last sort of year and 18 months or so. It's a relatively recent development in the context of, say, the Donbass war's been bubbling for half a decade now. So somehow it's kind of been that way. That considering the sheer animus that the Zionists and the Israeli lobby have for the Islamic Republic, and the fact that the Islamic Republic have had a lot of pawns on the chessboard that have since been knocked off. For instance, ever since Saddam's fallen, they've had a strong presence in Iraq. Well, Hezbollah is technically a proxy, or was a proxy, both of the Islamic Republic and of Bashar al-Assad, and obviously the Baathists have been defeated in Syria, which was a major blow to the ability of Iran to project westwards. But when you look at emergent technology, and I suppose we really started to see the effects of this in the second or third year of the Donbass war, with these hypersonic missiles and these sort of standoff conventional weapons, which, unlike a nuclear bomb, can be used more. They're not merely used as a threat; they actually have operational and sort of battlefield effectiveness, and also have a strategic effect that is probably similar to the use of how can I put this? In the same way that sort of heavy bombers are used in World War II. I mean, it's not the same. I know it's a bit of a weak comparison, but humor me for a moment, right? And that, given where warfare and technology, where things are currently situated, I do wonder if actually the U.S. administration missed the window to do this to Iran. That actually maybe at some point during the Obama era would have made more sense. You would have had 90% of your present military capability in terms of, aircraft strike weapons, even the Moab and other large conventional payload delivery systems, but without having quite arrived at the hypersonic, payload system that we have today. For example, the Russians have, the Kinzhal, the Oreshnik. They have all these other various types of weapons that, for instance, Iran can very directly threaten not just Israel as a country, but can inflict great peril and great damage on American bases in the Gulf. And having provoked this, this war with Iran, that actually we've seen both the fragility of the current sort of Gulf system, where sort of America acts as the guarantor for peace of the Arab Gulf countries, but also that the lobby has, obviously the Zionist lobby does have its goals in the area, and that in seeing a potential opportunity to oust the Islamic Republic, the Ayatollah, the mullahs, that they've got themselves stuck in a quagmire that they can't really walk back from with any grace or with any kind of happy outcome for any of the instigators. And yeah, I just wonder that if you look at the emergent the sort of technology we've seen in the last sort of decade, I do actually really think that if they were really set on doing this, that they'd missed their chance. Probably Trump 1 was the last chance to have done this. Between drones and the ballistic missiles, I just don't see how attacking now made any sense in hindsight. That's just me. That's just
Yeah, I think that I tend to agree, man. I just don't. If we could do it, all signs indicate we would have done. Short of nuclear weapons, if we could have done it, we would have done it. And I mean, right now you're seeing messages from Trump and the administration talking about, well, now we're really going to bring down the terrible economic penalties, with sanctions on Iran, as Red Hawk was talking about earlier in this stream. And it's like, okay, we did sanctions for 40 years or whatever, and now we're going to do all kinds of bombing and air campaigns. And we've also used like every lever that we could pull with Kurds. Apparently a large number of the people who were involved with, on behalf of the West, trying to destabilize the Iranian government before some of these latter air campaigns were Kurds, and others that they've paid. They've pulled the lever for their intelligence. Yeah, they've pulled their levers for that. They pulled their levers for the air campaigns. They pulled their levers for the sanctions, and now they tried to pull the levers again for attacking, by air, and now they're going back to sanctions. I just don't see how Trump's administration is going to be able to. I mean, there's only so much lipstick you can put on the pig,
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And we've even seen this, say, with Russia, for instance. It's sort of almost comical at this point, whether it's Ursula von der Leyen from the European angle, or whether it's someone from the Trump admin say, oh, we've got the 97th sanction package. It's like, oh, well, because the other 96 worked. At some point, like the lash of economic sanctions as both a penalty to the opposing side, but also as a means of like trying to stir up, trying to rally the troops at home. Like, there comes a point where it just doesn't work, because everyone can see that this is not effective. And going back to what I was saying about this should have been done, not that I would want it to happen anyway, but if the goals of both the lobby and the administration, and by the administration I mean like the deep state, essentially, the real decision makers in the Pentagon and Washington and the Beltway, say, if they really wanted this outcome, that they should have done it earlier. Because even then, for all of the sanctions that have been placed on Russia, like, Russia's actually managed to demonstrate that it has a very, well, firstly, a robust society that is not willing to dissent against Putin and the government in the Kremlin, and also that economically, aside from a bit of creeping inflation at the moment, that Russia has been more than able to maintain its production lines, has in fact increased production efficiency of vital, particularly war goods and war material, and also has maintained a civilian economy whilst at war. The Russians have proven to be far more resilient and far more effective than what probably any of us would have assumed to begin with. And in the end, if Russia is able to confront that head on, and then China's even in a more powerful position than it was 10 or 15 years ago, in order to provide, shall I say, quote unquote, auxiliary assistance to Russia, and in this case, obviously Iran too, that had the one American government or another chosen to strike Iran 10, 15, 20 years ago, that Russia itself would not have been in a position to assist the Iranians like they have. You got to think, Russia is stuck in quite this, I wouldn't say quagmire, but in a very glacial grind, an attrition grind in Donbass at the moment against Ukraine. Meanwhile, it is still providing, some assistance to Iran, as are the Chinese. And you do wonder that would this have been possible 15, 20 years ago? I don't think so. So on the basis of both assistance to Iran and the emergence of new weapon systems, I am just of the belief that the Beltway has missed the window of opportunity for this, in my opinion.
It really just is clear that the people that are running the American State Department now are just several standard deviation worse than the people who were running it several decades ago at this point.
Doesn't this make you miss like Robert Gates and Leon Panetta?
Yeah.
Damn it, we got rid of Gaddafi, man.
And it really just is amazing because of all the recent conflicts that the United States has chosen to get involved in. Pretty much all of the countries are going to become better off after our wars with them than they were beforehand. It's like Afghanistan, in better shape it was than when the United States invaded. Iran about to be the same way. Russia as well. Like all of these countries that we are forcing through like these economic sanctions to get out of this rapidly failing system that is globalism. These guys are, oh wow, we have to stand on our own 2 feet and make things domestically. It's like, oh wait, isn't that what Donald Trump wanted us to do here at home?
Don't forget the most striking transformation, which is North Korea.
That too. I mean, just look at the birth rates. They're going to win in the end.
Russia wouldn't touch them except very quietly. China had like a love-hate relationship with them. Everyone was willing to stand back from them, and now they're doing fairly well as regards China and Russia, and the military cooperation with Russia is becoming considerable from everything I can see. So, when you anchor this other block, with North Korea in the North Pacific and Russia, and of course, running all along the north and down into Central Asia and into Europe, and then Iran anchoring that area there that they all like to call West Asia. You can do so legitimately in the case of Iran, and China. I mean, and let's not forget that India is playing a very careful game and is tied, more importantly in terms of economics, to Russia more so than it is to Western powers. I mean, it's not entirely that way, but when you start thinking about the weight, I mean, I'm tired of hearing about the global South and how more of the population of the world favors them than us, but you still have to take that into account. I mean, what the hell is Australia going to do? Look at their population relative to the powers that surround them. The population does matter. So that block is beginning to shape up nicely. And as Marcus was saying earlier, it looks like we're running out of alternatives in terms of how to try to tackle it.
Well, one of the other things I wanted to inject in this conversation, and Marcus and I were talking about this off air, right? But as I've spent quite a bit of time abroad over the last several years, whether it's in Europe or Central America or Sub-Saharan Africa or what have you, it actually is. I find it's very shameful to be an American on the world stage right now, mostly because like pretty much everybody outside the United States borders just views America as Israel's bitch, and it's kind of really hard to argue against that at this point, but it really is frustrating when, it's like, if I were the Iranians, of course I wouldn't negotiate with the Americans. Several times now at this point, we falsely called for a peace negotiation, and the Israelis just blow up all the Iranian guys who show up at the gathering. And it's like, well, what the fuck, man? This is just so unbelievably dishonorable, and it's like, well, you can make comments about how maybe the Koreans want us gone or what have you and out of the Korean Peninsula. But it's like, okay, well, as soon as, Big Daddy Israel needs more munitions to protect them from Iranian ballistic missiles, okay, America pulls all of their stuff out and leaves everybody else holding the bag. It's just, it really is, we're better than this. as Americans and as men as well, we're better than this kind of behavior. And this is something that Pete and many other people talk about all the time, is that this is how they get you. They make you become them, and then they have you for forever, basically. It's like the same thing with cults. Cults will get you to engage in some absolutely despicable act or criminal act or something like that, where all of you guys are now locked in together and you're all in this thing together. And it's like, well, we blow up a couple little girls' schools and now we're just like them, and now they have you. So it's just, I don't think it's good for the soul of Americans to be involved in this stuff in this way. It's like, I don't think it's good for us to be supplying the IDF with munitions that they're using to kill little children in Gaza. It's like, and you can, and I know a lot of right wingers will say, counter this is like, oh, well, what are you simping for brown people or whatever? Like, you want them to come over here. You want Gazans to live in the United States. It's like, two things can be true at once, man. It's like, listen, I'm particularly stay up, awake at night worrying about the Iranians or worrying about the North Koreans or worrying about the Ukrainians or the Russians or the Israelis. I stay up at night worrying about Americans, right? But also at the same time, it's just not good for your soul as a human being to be involved in this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Just on your point, Red Hawk, maybe emphasize real Americans, firstly. I love that. I love that patent clip, by the way. But you're quite right. I mean, actually, funny enough to mention patent is that I still remember discussions even like around my own sort of family table in days gone by, that like in World War II, for instance, there was this real sense that when Americans passed through towns and villages, that people actually honestly thought, okay, relief has finally arrived, and whether they sort of had loyalties to one regime or another, without saying too much, there was this idea that Americans acted in good faith. Like for actually, as a personal anecdote, for instance, right? Like my own grandfather had a gripe with the British because I'm trying to think of how to say this with brevity.
Because they're British.
Well, yes, but like for instance, the British press used to sort of harp on about Italian ambitions in Africa, and it's just like, have you seen a map of the continent from 1936? Like the Italians aren't the ones who were like stretched from Cape to Cairo, and then of course with the Ethiopian war, they placed the sanctions, they closed Suez, all that sort of stuff, and so there was this sort of animosity. And my grandfather actually lived through a particular anecdote where in North Africa the British intentionally reduced the water rations to the Germans, and so the Italian prisoners who actually had their full rations would give the Germans some of their spare water, and the British would punish us both by reducing both of our by reducing both sets of rations. Whereas the Americans, the Italians would be like, oh, listen, we haven't had chocolate in like 5 years. Like can you spare us, like a packet of chocolate? And like the Americans would rock up with like a truck full of chocolate, because you guys had like tons of everything. And so there's this idea that like the Americans were quite fair people, even in the context of a war, and would act honorably. Okay, yeah, commanders might make certain choices, or the administration, like FDR, whatever, would make certain choices, and that's a different thing. But in fact, that most common Americans were held in high regard. And it's a pity now that, and this is where I suppose as an Aussie, like on one hand, I'm as Australians generally are, we sort of have a closeness to the British that maybe a lot of other Commonwealth countries don't share. But also to, like you guys, we are also like a settler country, and we sort of have that bit of frontier mentality and that sort of toughness of mind that a lot of other countries don't have. And so there is this sort of affinity that I think Americans and Aussies do share. And I think what brings to light is that when you look at the spats, for example, that I find quite tiresome now, of when and don't take this the wrong way, guys. I don't want to sound unwelcome on your stream, but on one hand, Americans will say whatever they say about Europors, but then inversely, it goes the other way, where Europeans and Brits will say the things they do about Americans about being cucks to the lobby, or yada yada. The State Department does this and the Pentagon does Y, and like America does all this nasty crap, so on and so forth. And I just don't know how productive that discourse is. In fact, I think it's detrimental. But I think it is important that whether we're talking about, say, like our friends in Britain, or whether you guys in America, or even indeed us in Australia, we make a very, very pronounced point to separate the conduct of our governments with that of good, decent people, many of whom are our friends, or at least ought to be our friends, and we should always keep that at the forefront of our mind.
Yeah, indeed.
Absolutely agree. Yep.
Well, the issues that white Western man is facing around the entire globe are issues basically all of us are sharing at the same time. You know,
Hmm.
and of course, the chief amongst is our own sovereignty and the right to our own destinies as white people throughout all of our countries around the entire world. We're all facing the same issue. When you see Somalians being dropped off in random in the middle of nowhere towns in Iceland,
Hmm.
like this isn't by accident. The fact that the Irish are losing control of their homeland, the Germans, the Australians, the
Yeah,
Canadians, New Zealanders, Americans,
yeah,
all of us are facing the exact same
yeah.
problem. Now there's going to
What,
be
what, what?
different
Yeah,
solutions. There's going to be different
yeah,
solutions that will be required for each place.
yeah.
But
Well,
indeed,
to use an allegory from, say, Lord of the Rings, like, not to be trite, but for instance, one could say that, when you go to visit Great Britain, say, okay, London is full of foreigners and Birmingham's full of foreigners and, Manchester, etc., etc. But you go to the countryside and it's still English. And I've had the good fortune of having spent a good amount of time in Britain, the last few years, and that has been largely true. But when, for instance, there's idyllic villages in like the central North Midlands, or in the southwest near, say, Dorset or something, or Somerset, and there's a hamlet, a town of 500 people, and then 2,000 foreigners rock up and completely transform that place. They're invading the shires, and it's not an accident. It's been done on purpose, and people like us know it's been done on purpose. And, like, as you rightly say, Red Hawk, it is happening in America. Why is there, for instance, hundreds of thousands of freaking Somalians in Minnesota? Like, why else would they be in Minnesota? I mean, has anyone been to Mogadishu? Mogadishu and Milwaukee are two very different bloody places. Like,
yeah,
it makes sense if they went to, like, the Rio Grande, right? Like,
yeah.
climatically speaking. But, we
Yeah,
all know that
they just happen to
right?
go to the state that they
Oh,
happen to go to the state that 6 months out of the year there's 6 feet of snow on the ground and has the largest
Correct.
welfare state of
oh
any of
yeah,
the
and
50.
and
Exactly.
Total
Exactly.
and all
coincidence.
the
Yeah,
all the
100%.
fucking Arabs in Hamtramck and Detroit, makes perfect sense. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, and just what was the other thing I wanted to sort of say on that is that also too is that, and I think you guys know that, well, I think I have mentioned to you guys before, but I literally had like a relative who fought in Patton's armor division in Normandy. Or not a relative, no, my dad's uncle, and I've had family who have fought in the U.S. Armed Forces, and it's galling to think that you know you want to be a patriotic person and you want your country to do well and to actually have its place in the sun, so to speak, and to sort of have a premier place in world affairs. And that there was a time where you sort of felt, okay, every country has its foibles, in every country, no, how can I say, no country is without its blemishes, right? Like, we just know that as a fact of nature. And that applies to European countries and otherwise, right? But by and large, you sort of felt that your country's a force for good, in one way or another, right? And at the very least, our countries have been, for the greatest part of recent modern history, been lovely places to have been born and lived in. You felt lucky and privileged to have been born in your country, whether you're an American or Australian or an Englishman or an Italian or whatever, right? Um, and yet that is changing very, very fast, and that is a very difficult conclusion to reach now. And that um, at the very least, sort of to harken back to what I was saying before, if we can be a little less harsh with each other, that's a good first step. But at least just realize that our governments and our institutions and our quote unquote leaders and elites are taking our countries to places where they ought not to be, and we should at least accept that about each other, because I don't think quote unquote shit slinging on the internet's going to make it any better amongst each other. And it's one thing to have like a good humored joke and to banter and whatever, but there's definitely a degree of nastiness about it that I think we should avoid. And but it's just true. You just think to yourself, you walk through a freaking war cemetery of any kind, and you sort of see like, oh, this private or that captain, 23 years of age, 19 years of age, and you think of the sacrifice that previous generations have passed for us. And I'm not saying this to engage in like boomer truthism. I don't mean that, but that young men are often pushed into the meat grinder of war to fulfill the goals of, in this case, you guys being Americans, the Beltway and the Pentagon and whatever. And then our countries get taken in the directions that they are. It's a very galling thing to have to stomach.
Yeah, it reminds me of that book. I forget the title of it. Zoomer Historian did a video on it not too long ago, where one of these guys who wasn't like a based right winger by any stretch, just as a passion project, went around interviewing British, the last veterans of World War II. He like wrote out to them in the newspaper. It's like, hey, open ad. Anyone who served in World War II, please write back, and I will compile all of them together and publish this book. And amazingly, it was an absurd amount of people who responded back, somewhere like the 90%, who basically said, no, if I would have known that this is what we would have gotten, I wouldn't have fought. And it's like
Yeah.
the meme that we make all the time, where it's like, well, at least we're not speaking German. Like meanwhile, all of our major cities are overrun with foreigners from God knows where, but actually most of which done through wars that we ourselves have fought at the behest of a foreign power in the Middle East, right? I mean, the statistic that'll just like shatter most boomer cons' brains when you bring up these foreign wars or what have you, because like 9/11 has such a huge mark in the American psyche, and rightfully so, is that there's more Muslims in the United States after September 11th than before. It's like, well, in any rational, country, that just would have never been the case. If this is any other period
Yeah.
in history, we would have had like a pogrom, the levels of Spanish Inquisition stuff, and Reconquista, getting rid of all of these people and never allowing them back for centuries. But that's just not the case. And we all
Yeah.
know why.
Exactly. And I think what we're sort of seeing is, I'm just trying to think. I know Yarvin uses that allegory of the cathedral, but I think we know that's the wrong building. And AA described the octopus, right, which I think is actually quite an elegant way to describe it, because it is very multifaceted. But needless to say, and I think if we can draw a distinction between them, even though they're not particularly common, we do have a base boomers, and there were people, I mean, because sadly the World War II generation has mostly departed now. There's not very many of them left, but there were, men who did fight in the struggle of the Great Wars, who did have buyer's remorse, even in time, in years gone by, as you say, Red Hawk. And I think it's worth saying that when one reflects on the state of the world now, it becomes increasingly clear that things happened in history as they did for a reason, and I mean that in a multitude of ways, not just in the one way that many of us might be thinking, but that ultimately these sort of ideas that were supposedly used as a justification for fighting, have not panned out to be exactly as they were sort of foretold, and also too that in many cases were sort of built on a false premise. I mean, for instance, I think one of the easiest sort of references that can be used to ever sort of begin the red pilling process with someone who's amenable to it is to say talk about the Lusitania, and for the better part of a century everyone swore black and blue that the Germans did the wrong thing and the Lusitania was a civilian ship. And then the manifest gets declassified 100 years later, and we know the Lusitania was armed to its gills with artillery shells and munitions to be sent to Britain, even though America at that point was still a quote unquote neutral country. And the Germans actually were well within their rights to sink it and gave the ship more than enough opportunities to surrender beyond its remit, and yet it was still used as a bludgeon against the German Empire, and used within the United States of America to justify entrance into the war, which, as you guys well know, there was great resistance, particularly in World War One, against American entrance to the war, which at that point was seen as a European squabble by the American media and by American society. And yet here we are. And I think too, it's it is sort of galling that if you look back in history, say you look at like countries that have come to the fore through great struggle, I think Rome and the Punic Wars is a good example of this. Is that, and particularly say in the Second Punic War, where if I have the numbers correct, I think 1 in 6 men of fighting age perished in the Second Punic War. So 1 in 6 men in Roman society aged between 19 and 40 years of age were killed within like a 20-year long war. And yet Rome became more powerful as a result. Rome extended its borders. Rome grew larger, more powerful, and there was a benefit to prevailing in that war. And yet that hasn't happened to us in the West. In fact, for every little conflict that there's been, it's almost like we've not only traded our soul in the West, but we've actually become less powerful. And for all the bombs that are being dropped in various parts of the world, our own countries get filled with migrants that sort of become this infinite tide as a result of it. And I think, people like us see it clearly for what it is, but it seems like Joe Public's only just realizing now what the repercussions are.
Yeah, in that book I was talking about earlier, Dawn Browning, our favorite woman in the chat, pointed it out. The book is called "The Unknown Warriors" by Nicholas Pringle, so
Hmm.
people can check that out. But
I have to look at that. That sounds interesting.
uh, but uh, anyway, yeah. So one final thing I wanted to show everyone here before we wrap up on the evening, and talking about servicemen or what have you, and this conversation that people are having all the time, basically, is just the fact that this discussion about the United States' relationship with Israel that we've been talking about on the show for years at this point has really just broken containment. And this was very, very interesting that came out this week. I've talked to other people who, of course, are military
Oof.
men and who have served in the past about is it super common for something like this, and of course, like, guys on ships or what have you, and are griping all the time. But the fact that this is actually leaked in this way, is definitely a change, shall we say. So here's just some writing on dust that was accumulated on one of these planes. We're assuming is coming from a aircraft carrier or something that's in the Strait of Hormuz. There was never confirmation of exactly where this was from, but just looking around on here and seeing what some of our brave boys over there are writing down on these. Really just shows you where everyone's minds are at. And to quote a friend of ours, the kids are all right. you know, it's
You put it well, Red Hawk, that I think this is definitely a case of breaking containment. And as I like to say, genie shall not back in bottle. I think if people look back at the last at least half decade, but in some ways much further back, but at the very least in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, um, a lot of the things that a lot of people didn't want to accept being true have become irrefutably proven so, and that the ramifications of following this line can be quite disastrous for a country, and it has proven to be disastrous for Americans and the American state sort of writ large. And I think kind of in a similar way to how I think progressives have sort of self-mortally wounded themselves. We're in the Obama era. You kind of thought we're going to have this sort of rainbow leftism. Space right. What do you guys call it? Gay space race communism, whatever it is. Um,
yeah.
that with the end of the Obama era, we sort of entered that, and it was just going to be that ad infinitum. Like that was just it. We sort of arrived at this point, and there's no sort of going back. And in fact, a lot has changed as a result of reaching that era. And in fact, the left kind of became so arrogant and ergo complacent that they've actually sort of lost their ideological edge. And you sort of look at the sort of political dynamic and the kind of the way in which politics is dealt with, particularly among, say, like us right-leaning millennials, also the Zooms coming up, and now the alphas who are sort of following them, is that we have a much sharper edge to ourselves that our predecessors didn't, and we have a great deal more insight um, and you even look at like these sentiments now are bubbling to the fore, which they just weren't able to 10, 15, 20 years ago and beyond. And now we're particularly in America, say, like between the reinforcement of, say, 2A movements in America, what's happening also on the basis of like rolling back Roe v. Wade. Like there are actual examples of where progressivism is just decaying at the seams and unable to sort of hold its ideological ground. I think the Zionist lobby have done the same thing, whereby it's like, you think of that trying to think of that American general, Wesley Clark, who talks about like, oh, we had this meeting in the Pentagon and there's like a short list of countries, we want to invade them all. I think it was Wesley Clark, and it's Syria and it's Iraq and it's Libya, yada yada yada. There's like this short list of countries, and basically Iran now is the last one. Iran then sort of as an addendum, Hezbollah with Lebanon, right? But all these other regimes have been knocked out, and they probably thought, oh well, Iran's the last one. It's pretty isolated. We're going to complete the program, and instead of actually looking at a while back in the stream, we were talking about like battlefield fundamentals and technology, and how Iran has these sort of options that they didn't have 10 years ago with ballistic missiles and other conventional payload systems, etc., standoff weapon systems, which has allowed Iran to defend itself against U.S. and Israeli incursion and these sort of these strikes and other methods to try and destabilize and topple the regime, which have not worked in Iran. That I do wonder if the Zionists had reached that same point as like the left did in America and even in Britain and parts of Europe, whereby there's a sort of like arrogance by virtue of perpetual success and has degraded their ability to make sound judgment and to actually operate things properly. And now they just keep putting their foot in it because they keep making mistakes. And as often happens with error, the more mistakes you make, the more desperate you are to amend those mistakes, ergo making you more prone to making more mistakes. And I think the sort of Zionist Israel lobby, I suppose the kind of people that say John Mersheimer would outline in his book, for instance, are making these mistakes more and more. And in making these mistakes, they make the agenda more egregiously obvious. And ergo, for example, those soldiers there, them expressing that sentiment becomes quite an easy thing to do now compared to times past.
Yeah, absolutely. This, as you said, Marcus, nobody's going back to the way things were in previous decades, where Israel just had carte blanche to do whatever it wanted as it relates to American public opinion. That's going the way of the dinosaur in rapid pace. I mean, a lot of people have made a big stink out of the primaries that were going on over the last couple of days, and I know the one that got a shitload of attention was James Fishback down in Florida, who ended up getting like third or fourth in his primary results, somewhere around like the 10 to 12% of the vote amount or what have you. And, I mean, I don't particularly have a dog in this fight whatsoever, really. I mean, we haven't like gone out on the show or anything like endorsing candidates and stuff like that. But I look at that and I'm like, that's interesting. I mean, 10 to 12% absolutely locks you in for another attempt at running. And that's like 10 or 12 more percent than you would have gotten in any election prior to this, for sure, especially somebody running on his platform that he was, regardless of whether or not he's a meme candidate or not, is kind of irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. But it is interesting looking at the numbers coming out of the districts in which like were around universities and colleges, and Fishback just won the youth vote in all of those areas in a state that is completely dominated by boomers. And it kind of just shows you which way the winds are blowing. And I think people are missing the forest for the trees here, focusing on individual candidates as such and making this like all like personal or what have you about people like you've never even met. Like this is kind of weird, it's like, but I just think that is it's interesting. I mean, we all know that like this, people can try and bitch and moan all you want about like, oh, with Zionists you win or what have you, and it's just, this is just ridiculous from where the American public is going at a rapid pace. It's just almost every single normie I talk to now is just it's just like open season to talk about like Jews and Jewish influence and Israeli influence in ways that it never was before. Just like going like any gaming like chat room and any public game or what have you, you just see people nonstop making fun of Israelis and Israel, and it's like, well, that's interesting. So it might not be the most intellectual takedown that I would prefer, but it's certainly better than what we had. So
correct, but that's just on that point very briefly, is that I kind of have this, and I can hardly explain the emotions. I don't know if it's like a combination of like contempt or pity or like just disregard or whatever, but it's sort of funny, even like in legacy media, right? You sort of see these, and there's this sort of cadre, and they're kind of mid to late Gen Xers, millennials, and really, really early Zoomers, right? Who you might say have nailed their colors to their flag regarding, say, Zionism, for instance. And by this, I don't mean even Jews at all. I mean like Gentiles specifically, and like other groups of people who've sort of been convinced by the arguments of Zionism or feel an allegiance to Zionism as a second order consequence of being sort of, quote unquote center right or whatever, or like, centrist moderate, whatever, whatever political persuasion they have in the conventional mainstream sense. And that they have been trying so hard to like provide defense and cover for what we have seen, what has been so evident in the last couple of years, right? Particularly since, that event in October in, over there, and then the subsequent, catastrophe in Gaza, and then this nonsense with Iran and whatever, where it's just become so apparent, like it's undeniable, essentially. And just watching them try and like peddle out the same tired tropes and the same tired defenses and the same catchphrases and the whole like everything is everything is anti-Semitism and yada yada yada, and you're this and you're that, and it's like people just can I actually like curse, like can I swear? Like, people don't give a fuck anymore. Like people are done. Like people are I've had up to their eyeballs with the same nonsense. Like in the end, you can only see the likes of Mark Levin just get like in this rabid bloodlust on his stupid show, so many times until you just become kind of like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like every time you see Mark Levin, you dislike the Zionists more and more. And put it this way, like funnily enough, that like even Fuentes made this admission, right? That he like grew, he like used to watch Mark Levin, and even like myself personally. I mean, I know I'm a millennial, right? But like once upon a time, I actually found his show kind of interesting because I kind of, as a non-American, I found his discussions about the Constitution interesting and informative as someone who wasn't American, for example. But then like the the mask slips and all the sort of confetti and the colorful things fall away, and you sort of see what's underneath. You sort of see the man behind the curtain. You think, hang on, what is this crap,
it's like the anti-Zionism position now is kind of just a filler for almost like are you actually genuine or not? Like, do you have your own sovereignty over your own positions? It's not even it's like a proxy for somebody who's actually genuine and who isn't just completely bought in by the system and the regime. It's like when you see like characters like that brilliant Holly Handjob character that we've discussed on this show before, trying to defend like, oh, we should rename the Strait of Hormuz the Strait of America. It's like, dude, who the fuck your age actually thinks this way? Dude, nobody does. Everyone can see right through it. This position of like, oh, we're gonna be ultra rabid Zionists like Mike Huckabee is, and you're like 21 years old when prices for homes are out of control and people can't afford to start families or what have you. And the number one concern that you have as a 21-year-old white man in the United States of America is the current like Zionist project for Greater Israel. It's like, get out of here, dude. And it's not even like, anti-Semitic position as such that a lot of these people are coming to, even though many people are reaching those conclusions, at breakneck speed compared to just 5 years ago. But a lot of people just see this for what it is, in the sense of, no, like, you aren't a genuine person. You aren't a genuine commentator. You're not a legitimate like free thinker in any way. You were bought by the regime. This is what this position has become a proxy for. So, which is good for us, regardless.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is, because as you guys probably appreciate, there's been a fair bit of discourse coming out of Britain recently in this regard, right? And it's kind of
with this Charlie Downs character.
Yeah. Well, an extension of like this restore stuff, and in the end, whether restore's legitimate or not legitimate, compromise, like that's neither here nor there. Like in the end, that's sort of stuff that's beyond our control, beyond our power, and we're never going to know, truly one way or another. But like, nonetheless, that there are people, that are proximal to that, who are good guys, who have the best of intentions, and want the right thing for their country. In the same way that I'm a patriot for my country, and you guys are patriots, for your country. They're also British patriots who want the best for their country, and we obviously wish them the best, the utmost success, and we should all consider ourselves, friends, right? Dare I say we are international nationalists, right? And want the best for each other. But needless to say, what I was going to mention is that for all of the content and for all of the work that people in our sphere could do, like the amount of videos explaining this and detailing that, and talking about like this event in history or that event in history and that consequence and this conspiracy and yada yada yada. It's like, just give Melanie Phillips a freaking her smartphone and her Twitter account. they're doing it for us.
Yeah,
Like just give Mark
just,
Levin a
I
damn
know,
video
it's
recorder and put it in
amazing.
front of his desk and like
Yeah.
show him a photo of the Ayatollah. We don't need to do anything. Just
Yeah,
like
they
they're
just
doing
cannot help
the
them.
Lord's good work
It
for
really is
us
amazing, Marcus,
without us
isn't it?
lifting a finger.
Yeah, it
You
really
know?
is
And that's
amazing,
like
Marcus.
has literally radicalized like the common person in a strange way.
Yeah, they literally just can't help themselves. You know, it's like ingrained in their blood that they have
Yeah.
to gloat about this. It's the same stuff with that Morocco business that was just occurring a couple of weeks ago with us, the Quetta region in Spain, which is still a complete shithole several weeks later. No shocker there. But you know, they literally just can't help themselves but gloat about it and just say what they're doing. It's like just show people Ben Gavir's Twitter account. Just show people, you know, people in the Israeli government what they're saying about the situation. Just like have an IDF soldier talk or give a microphone to somebody like Melanie Phillips. And it's some of the most, it's like that old meme. It's like, this is from the Daily Forward or the Daily Stormer, you know?
Yeah. Like literally, right?
These people, you know?
And a fine example of
Anyway,
that, even with like, when thingy, what's his name, Fuentes did that interview with Piers Morgan, and then like
oh,
Piers Morgan, like Piers Morgan probably in some ways like, okay, Fuentes got his point across, and Piers did make Fuentes look a little bit ridiculous in some ways, and then he had to bring his friend on, Daniel Finkelstein. It's like, oh my god, and then that whole thing took on a life of its own, and rather than it being like the hit job on Fuentes, which is what that was basically meant to be, there's this whole other controversy about Finkelstein and the double standards thing regarding like Zionists and, oh well, I'm a British person X, but I'm also loyal to this country in the Middle East Y, and then really that interaction has sort of like ended up with this whole Melanie Phillips thing. It's like, oh, let me tell you what it means to actually be British, but here's this exception for us. But
yeah,
you
exactly.
have a civic identity. It's like, what the hell? It's like, do you understand that the people who occupy the British Isles have literally been there since like Dogger Bank connected Britain to the European mainland before the Ice Age?
You know,
Do you have
people,
any idea of this?
the native people of the British Isles have
Oh my
been
God.
there for thousands upon thousands of years longer than Jews first settled in the Holy Land. You know, to say that the British don't have an ancestral claim to their homeland, but the Jews do, when none of the current ruling class of the Likud party or the Israeli government where it could trace their lineage back to that region because they were all Eastern Europeans.
I was gonna say, it's like, oh, that's a Polish sounding surname.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
anyway,
exactly. All these people are from fucking Eastern Europe. None of them are from this region of the world. And the people who actually are from the region of the world are the Gazans who converted to Islam during the Crusades. You know, like this is ridiculous.
Or before, exactly. And it's like, and another point, just because you touched on it, and I want to say this, I don't get a chance to say it that often, and I say it from the standpoint of someone who's actually studied classics, and for those of your watchers who don't know, I co-hosted Apostolic Majesty channel for like a couple many years. He's doing other things now, and I've taken a break as well for my own reasons. But we have a whole bunch of content that we've talked about history all the way from the Bronze Age to beyond World War II. So check out Apostolic Majesty, fantastic streamer. But one thing that it is worth mentioning from that classical standpoint is even like the framing of what they call anti-Semitism, or even how they describe anti-Semites from their own perspective, right? Of that, what you have is basically the three major groups that comprise of that country are the Sephardi's, the Mizrahis, and the Ashkenazis, as we know, right? And they all have different lineages, and they are groups of people who adhere to their religion, to Judaism, under different circumstances and in different localities when they weren't present predominantly in the Levant, in the Holy Land, right? And to varying degrees, they obviously they do have some degree of Levantine extraction, but in fact, it is the people who have lived there from like Alexandrian times, like Bronze Age times, who have continued to their descendants have continued to dwell in those areas up until the modern day. And this being, say, for example, the descendants of the Canaanites, the descendants of the Phoenicians, the descendants of the Nazarenes and the Galileans, for instance. And they have stayed there. And whether they were converts, say, to Christianity, after the work of the apostles in the New Testament, or whether it was with the arrival of the Muslims in the 7th century, or as you say, after the advent of the Crusades, they converted to Islam, etc. There are groups whose ancestry and lineage dates back centuries, and who are actually the natives, quote unquote, of, say, shall we call it the Levant, of the Holy Land, Palestine, etc., who actually that is where they belong, and they have resided there for hundreds, indeed thousands of years. Whereas this group have sort of been repatriated there since even before World War II, but certainly after World War II, and then have the gall to call themselves this. Meanwhile, they adjudge and they smear their critics as being anti-Semitic, whereas actually their neighbors and the people they displace and the people who live around them are actually Semitic people. The idea that they will criticize a quote unquote Palestinian or a Jordanian or whatever with being anti-Semitic is just outstandingly wrong. It's actually a misfit, and it's totally actually incorrect. And a lot of people don't catch that because they don't have. And I'm not saying this as a criticism of people, like, not everyone's a historian. I appreciate that, but just for like the benefit of your viewers, for instance, know this information is that like they are not actually like completely Semitic. They adhere to a Semitic religion, but in terms of like who are the actual Semites, it's actually like literally the Arabs and the Levantines and the Phoenicians and the Lebanese. Like they are actually the Semitic people of the area, whereas the people that have arrived there more recently are a mishmash of people.
Netanyahu's original family surname is Milikowski.
That's right, yeah. Netanyahu's literally like an invented surname in that regard. Yeah.
Indeed. So
sorry for the tangent, Red Hawk, but
it's just totally fine. And again, it bears repeating because the history isn't sometimes that something we talk about on the show because we just assume that many people who are listening to us already come in with these priors. But again, it just is just so flagrant and thrown right in your face when you see these people who have the gall to say that, oh, well, the Israelis have a special carve out for their people in this part of the world, but the British aren't allowed to have a homeland. The Welsh, the Northern Irish, the Scots, the Americans, the Germans, pick your country here, right? The people who built the land or built the countries and established a ethnogenesis for themselves in these places, in some cases for thousands of years, if you look to some of our European friends, and definitely in the case of Americans over here, because America isn't the magic dirt, right? Like, if the white man never arrived here, the country wouldn't look like it does now. It would still look like, a bunch of wigwams and people trading their wampum and hunting bison on the open plains, right? I mean, it would look nothing like the United States today.
And tearing hearts out of chests on top of the sun temple of Coatzacoalcos.
Exactly. And even worse if you look to
worse
if you look to some of the people further south, whether it be their blood rituals that are still occurring today. In some of these places. So it's just so obvious the game that is played here, and this is where we get the meme from all the time. It's like, hello, fellow whites. It's like, in one breath, Melanie Phillips claims like, oh, well, I'm just as British as you. And then I have the gall to say like, oh, well, actually, I'm not British. I belong to this Levantine group of people, but I'm also British. And because I'm a British person, I'm allowed to say that, Hakeem and Abdul Al-Kaboom here, who just arrived on the British shores yesterday, are just as British as me. It's like, well, you've already said that you're not British, so which is it?
Yeah, it's like, listen, Chud, don't you know that Axel Rudick-Cabano is just as British as Alfred the Great? Like, don't be a racist.
Exactly.
Like, don't be bigot.
Same here. Pablo, who just snuck over the southern border with help from Rajesh from Ushta Pudar or whatever the fuck. It's just as American as John Adams. Don't you know, guys? Amy Coney Barrett says so. Anyway.
Such cases.
Yeah. Anyway, well, this has been a good discussion, fellas. Why don't we power through some of these super chats and everyone can have a good evening. So,
splendid.
From the top, our good friend here, Solid Snake 1964, as ever, is sneaking behind enemy lines with this cardboard box to be the first super chatter. For $5, he says, evening, gents. As many of you now know, Thomas 777's book is out. I've only gotten through the awesome forward so far, but it's great. Everyone buy a copy. Yes, indeed. And again,
I bought my copy today. So yeah, put your money where your mouth is, gents. Buy one, help him out, and be enlightened.
Yeah, yes, of course. So people can find this on Amazon right now. You can either type in the Nuremberg regime, or you can look up Thomas's name. That's Thomas Cyr, Cyr. and you guys can please do buy a copy of his book. And the other thing too is we saw that how Thomas's Twitter account was nuked mere hours after his shout out on Tucker Carlson's show by Daryl Cooper. So definitely go out of your way to get the book now, because I would not be surprised if there's some fuckery that goes on here and the book is delisted or something like that. So do please go and get it now while you can. So yes, everyone remember to support fellow friends, of course. Bed of Britannia, who is supporting a channel membership sticker for 5 months. He gets to be one of the few elite members who gets to watch our gaming streams on the channel at the standing back and standing by tier. See, he sends us a membership chat. The Thirsty Benito strikes again. Man, this is some old. This guy's been around.
If you know, you know.
That's some deep lore right there.
That is some deep lore.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And the memes never die, but the reputation lives on.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Well, it's funny now because you go into AA's videos now, and the channel membership base is just completely done like a 180, and almost nobody knows all the lore of like the UO days or what have you, which truly was some of the most fun that we ever had in our internet careers. Like the UO days was truly something magical. It was a really fun time.
They were.
Yeah, but anyway, like all good things, they must come to an end. So.
And,
anyway.
and as you guys know, when you discover the new continent, there are greener pastures beyond the Appalachians. So,
indeed. Armitage Elitist for $2 says Haster, probably referring to son of Haster in the chat. But as we were saying last week, everyone get your tickets for the new Ivy League event that is going on here in a couple of weeks. So if you guys are OGC members, reach out to your regional liaisons, and if you're not, definitely get involved. So let's see. And then we have our favorite Australian woman in the chat, Dawn Browning, for $20. She sends us a super sticker as she does every week, and this time it is a cartoon woman expressing joy, and her ponytail is forming into a heart over her head. So thank you, Mrs. Browning.
that's adorable. Thank you, Dawn. I was going to say as well, because Australians tend to be few and far between our circles. I got a feeling that I'm a mutual of Dawn's. I'm going to have to check on my Twitter, but.
Well, knowing you, my friend, yeah, she's a woman, so you are most certainly are following her. So.
All right, after the Thirsty Benito comment, I resolved not to say anything at all. All I'm going to say is you should follow Field Marshal Browning. You probably already do. She's an excellent mutual, and I should add, happily married.
Yes, good friend of the show, indeed. Yes. And, and I will say, I didn't chime in with this comment earlier that Marcus was making about Australians, because he was in the middle of his sentence in his rant, which was epic. But, we've talked about Australians on the show previously as well. But I do think of all the various Anglo people around the world, Americans really do have a special kinship with Australians. I've always liked Australians ever since I was a young boy. I think our histories are very, very similar in the sense of conquering frontiers and what have you. And yes, I I speak for all Americans in this side of thing that we do wish our Australian friends, success in their own endeavors that they're having with their own country at this time. So everybody in Australia, definitely buddy up, for the harsh times ahead. And we do hope that you guys can solve all of your problems, just like we too over here hope to solve our own.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Here.
Okay. Well, I think that is a good place to end it on. Mr. Semiogogue, direct people to how they can support you and find more of your work. You have some books out there. People should help you out as well. Support fellow friends.
Absolutely. You can. Thank you, Red Hawk. You can buy my sci-fi called Vinculum. You can find that on Amazon, or if you go to my Twitter or X bio page, there are links to buy my books. There's also a collection of poetry, which it's not commonly the case for poetry, is quite good. Just ask me, I'll tell you. It's called Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. Also, if you'd like to help support me, you can go to Buy Me a Coffee and just specify whether it's for my wife, in which case it will be conscientiously handed over to her to buy diapers or like children's beds or bouncy seats. or for me, in which case it will be used for AR-15 rails and iron sights, and I need an EOTech 3x magnifier. So please do help me out. It would be much appreciated. You can follow me on X at Semiogogue.
All right. Yes, definitely do go follow fellow friends everywhere. And Mr. Furius Pertinax, thank you for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to speak with you once again, my friend. Where can people find
Indeed.
more of your work?
Well, like as I just mentioned before, long time sort of co-host with Apostolic Majesty on his channel, so we have a great deal of content we've done there. I'm taking a break from things in terms of long form content, as IRL has got a bit crazy for me in the last sort of 12 months or so. So yes, you know, if you go YouTube, Apostolic Majesty, he has several different playlists of several you know, topics of videos. We have a great deal of standalone videos as well. You know, talk about World War One and World War Two. We've spoken about you know, Russia and the realm of orthodoxy, the nations of Charlemagne. There's a great deal of stuff there. The Bronze Age, you know, whatever topic happens to touch your fancy, we've usually, or in most cases, have canvassed it. So check that out. You can, if you fancy following my ramblings, I am on Twitter at Renovatio Furious. And I was just going to say that I don't have a lot on, but funnily enough, and it's quite sad actually. I haven't sort of done anything with, you know, our American bros for a while, but it's funny. It never rains but it pours. Literally, about a day and a half ago, I did a recording with Jay Burden, so that will be out soon. And obviously, you know, we've had a chat, and hopefully, it's not so long between streams with you guys. It'd be nice to be back some other times. I've always been an appreciator of the old Glory Club. I actually remember, I think I streamed with you guys like very, very early from when you launched your channel. And I like what you guys do. I have a lot of you know, admiration for the stuff you guys are up to, and the fact that you guys really do strive to help each other out in the American sphere. So insofar that you are able, if you are an American, most definitely do your best to support the old Glory Club. These guys are doing excellent work, and they have our utmost endorsement from the Antipodes.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you again very much for coming on, sir. And everyone be sure
My
to
pleasure.
follow these two gentlemen and support them in their endeavors. For myself, please do check out on Sundays. Charlemagne, Mr. D, and myself are doing Dr. D's cinema. And this Sunday, we will be watching John Carpenter's The Thing, you know, on Sunday. So definitely be around for that. So watch that on Mr. D's Twitter, because we can watch movies, because Twitter has no copyright laws whatsoever. So we can just live watch movies and comment on them. So
be careful if you speak Norwegian famously. The entire movie is given away in the first scene if you can speak Norwegian. So yeah, if you do speak Norwegian, plug your ears with wax like Odysseus, you know, roped to the mast for the first 10 minutes.
All right. I'll be sure to look out for that, because I've actually never even seen the movie. I've seen clips of it throughout the years, but I'm sure we'll talk about that. Anyway, everybody check out American Spirits on Monday, Chapter House on Wednesday. Another Pony Express radio episode will be here next Thursday. Check out the OGC Substack, and of course, join your local OGC chapter if you are indeed an American man. We will see you guys next week.
When I pass on my good genes to my sons, they're going to join the old Glory Club.